Welcome back to Crime Bowl, everyone. Today we're going deep on a case. Um, this one really messed with the whole true crime world. The murder of Felicia Gayle, and then just the wild case of Marcellus Williams.
Yeah, there are so many questions that this whole thing brings up about how our justice system works, about like reasonable doubt and using testimony from informants, and then of course, the death penalty. It always comes back to that.
Oh, yeah. Because even though Williams was convicted, right, sentenced to death for
Mm.
Gayle's murder, in the end he was executed after they found DNA evidence. And it didn't connect him to the crime scene,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
at all. So how did this even happen? Let's go back to the start.
Absolutely. The
Yeah.
story starts in 1998. We're in University City, Missouri. It's a suburb of St. Louis. Quiet,
Yeah.
And Felicia Gayle, she was a reporter for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch before, tragically, found murdered in her own home.
Yeah, and this was really brutal. I remember reading about it. She was stabbed like a ton of times.
Yeah.
43 times. It was so violent, and it really shook everyone up,
Yeah.
especially because the neighborhood was so peaceful. And at first, there were no leads, no suspects or anything. Almost a year later, they arrested Marcellus Williams.
Wow. What made them arrest him after all that time?
Well, it was mostly based on information from this informant, Henry Cole. He
Yeah.
was locked up with Williams, and Cole said that Williams confessed to him while they were in prison together.
Oh, wow. That's some heavy testimony.
Yeah.
But just relying on an informant, doesn't that seem kind of risky? Especially for something this serious.
You're right on the money with that. Testimony from informants can be super unreliable for lots of reasons. Like, they might have their own reasons for working with the police, maybe a shorter sentence for themselves, or to, like, get back at someone. So you have to really, really look at what they say. And in this case, Cole, the informant, he had a history with drugs, legal trouble. So it makes you wonder even more about if he was telling the truth.
So it sounds like the prosecution was leaning hard on this testimony. And it was maybe shaky from the start. Was there any other evidence, like anything that connected Williams to this crime?
So there was also testimony from this woman, Laura Asaro. She was with Williams romantically at the time of the murder, and she said she saw Williams with stuff that was supposedly taken from Gayle's place. But Asaro, she had a criminal record too, which obviously makes you wonder about her story too.
So they're really putting a lot of faith in what these two people are saying. But what about forensics? Like, was there any real proof that put Williams at the crime scene?
That's the weirdest part of this whole thing. There was nothing, no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing that actually put him there. The whole case was basically built on what Cole and Asaro said. Plus, that stuff that might have been stolen.
So they convicted him with no solid forensic link.
Yep. In 2001, guilty, sentenced to death. And the defense, they fought hard, saying that there wasn't any physical evidence, and that should be enough to make them doubt he did it. It didn't work.
That's just crazy to me. Like, such
Yeah.
a weak connection, and they send a guy to death row. Seems like reasonable doubt to me. What happened next? Did they appeal?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Williams and his lawyers, they appealed a bunch of times. And they always brought up the missing physical evidence as the big problem. And then, in 2015, things changed, big time. That's when they finally tested the murder weapon for DNA, a knife they found at the scene, and the results, well, they were a shock.
Yeah, I bet. So after all those years, did it match Williams? Was the case finally closed?
No, it actually didn't. The DNA on that knife, it wasn't Marcellus Williams's. They got a hit, but it was some unknown guy.
Whoa. That's huge. So they're going to reopen the case, right? Like you'd think they would have to with DNA evidence that says he's not the one.
It's crazy, right? You'd
Oh.
think so. But the prosecutors, they still said Williams was guilty. They said the DNA didn't mean he was innocent.
Oh, wow. They really stuck to their guns on that, huh? I can't imagine what Williams and everyone supporting him must have been going through. Like new evidence shows up and he's still facing execution. Did the prosecutors say why they still thought he did it? Even with the DNA?
Yeah, they said maybe Williams had someone else with him, an
Yeah.
accomplice. And that guy actually used the knife? Or they said the DNA could have gotten messed up somehow, contaminated.
Mm-hmm. Those seem like kind of weak arguments, right?
Yeah.
Especially since the whole case was already on shaky ground.
Yeah, a lot of people felt that way. The public was split right down the middle. Some were like, yeah, he's guilty. But a lot of people thought they were going to execute an innocent man. And it became this big national thing. People were arguing about the death penalty, wrongful convictions, and if you can trust eyewitnesses and informants.
Sound like this case really got people talking about some super important stuff. Did all that attention change anything for Williams?
It did. So they were going to execute him. But then just hours before, the governor of Missouri at the time, Eric Greitens, He stopped it. He said, hold on, this new DNA evidence, it changes things. We need to look at this again. So he got this special board together, all retired judges, and he told them, go over everything, the DNA, everything.
What a relief that must have been for Williams and his lawyers. After all those years, there was finally some hope. What was this board supposed to do exactly? Was it just about the DNA, or were they looking at the whole case again? So we're left hanging right. This board is looking at everything. The DNA doesn't match. And people are starting to think maybe they got it wrong the first time. So
Yeah.
what happened?
Well, the board wasn't just looking at the DNA itself. They had to decide, did it create enough doubt to throw out the whole conviction? So they had to weigh that new evidence against the original testimonies and what the prosecution was saying. The whole picture.
Man, that's a tough job. That guy's life is on the line. Must have taken forever.
Oh, it did. Months and months. They went through all the little details, heard both sides, examined all the evidence. The Williams case was everywhere, front page news. The whole country was watching, waiting to see what they'd say.
That must have been intense. So what did they say? Did they say he should get a new trial? Or did they stick with the guilty verdict?
They couldn't agree. Some thought the new evidence was enough to have another trial, but others thought there was enough to keep the original verdict. It was a deadlock.
Ugh. That's awful. So what happened then? Did they just let him go because they couldn't decide?
Nope. The case went back to court. Williams and his lawyers kept fighting. They appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court, said you can't execute someone without DNA proof, especially when there's DNA pointing at somebody else. It's not right.
That's got to be tough, knowing your life is in the hands of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Did they do anything?
They said no, they wouldn't hear the case. So with nowhere left to turn, Marcellus Williams was executed in September 2024.
That's just,
Wow.
wow. Even with all that doubt, the system failed him. This whole case, it really makes you wonder, what does this say about how our justice system works?
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to the death penalty.
Yeah. The Williams case, it's like a warning. It shows how our system can get it wrong and how someone could be executed for something they didn't do. It shows that maybe we can't always trust what informants say. And it makes you think about the death penalty, Is it ever okay if we're not 100% sure someone's guilty?
It's scary to think about. Even with evidence, sometimes the system messes up and people pay the price. It makes you think about what we believe about guilt and innocence.
Yeah.
And how high the stakes are when we get it wrong.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with this question, did they execute an innocent man? That's something we all got to think about. The Marcellus Williams case, it sticks with you, makes you think about the hard stuff, and it makes you want to see a system that actually protects everyone.
Yeah. Heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking us through it. It really makes you think.
It was my pleasure. These cases are important to talk about. They remind us that we got to keep watching. Forensic evidence matters, and we got to keep fighting for a justice system that works for everyone.
You've been listening to Crime Bowl. True crime, no bull.